And this is kind of a cool subject because we often don't really consider some of the finer points of what you can and can't do within advertising, as well as some of the things that you can do, but at the same time, we self regulate. So, this is a bit of an area of talking about how government assesses some advertising claims and then how we ourselves assess it. And that's an important consideration to make because we're going to get into a little bit of foundation within libertarianism. Um, and this is mainly the aspect of limited to zero government when it comes to libertarianism. And so, where this comes into play is a lot of it is based in economics with Adam Smith. Now, if you know Adam Smith, this is a very famous economic mind that talk a lot about of what was called the invisible hand. Basically, that we have a government that is controlling certain things that we do in terms of our free will to make products, to sell products, and so forth. And the free market is controlled by this invisible hand. So, in other words, this is very Ayn Rand kind of philosophy here, where we're saying that we are kind of forced to have similar product sales within the market and similar strategies, despite the fact that we might have an advantage because we have a better product or we make more money or whatever it may be. And so, there's a lot of people that have a problem with this, that we say this is the invisible hand kind of controlling the way we're doing things. And a lot of people have major disagreements with that, especially when it comes to business. Because, again, if you work, this is kind of the area of the American dream where you would say, if I work hard, I should be successful and get the things that I want. Whereas, the libertarian ideology would kind of state this is a little counterintuitive of the American dream of, government being able to tax and, again, limit the free market of where it is. So we've also got Mises and Hayek. Free individual actions are not judged by others or government. Individuals always act rationally. Individuals receive and understand all necessary information in order to act on their best interests. The ideal market is laissez-faire capitalism. No government intervention in the market other than the minimal protection by the law of contractual arrangements between parties. And I'm going to stop right there for a second. And the main reason is because this is an idea of where the initial oxymoron of is there such thing as advertising ethics? And many people would say absolutely, because if we're looking this through a libertarian philosophy lens, we would absolutely say that this is something that we act as rational human beings when we try to advertise something or try to get our specific company out there in the best possible way. And again, the ideal market is this hands-off capitalism. So the government does not have any intervention with this market other than what is said here, minimal protection of law of contractual arrangements between parties. So again, it's not inherently that there is some system of government controlling everything. It's just within the between parties, they make agreements in this case. So there's always an abundance of natural resources and a shortage of labor. All or most of free market participants have equal power and contractual arrangements. And again, this is a notion that you may not agree with this. And some of you might agree with this in terms of the area of being able to have a product or a service or something within sales that we are able to push this kind of market to where, we don't have a lot of government regulations for. So what I'm going to be talking about within regulations of advertising, people within this libertarian philosophy would be strongly against it. Again, this is, the mention of Ayn Rand, for instance. She's very well known through Atlas Shrugged in terms of this idea that this particular person works extremely hard, the other does not. Who deserves the better benefits in this case? So, Libertarian approach, again, we also look through John Locke. All mankind being equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. A lot of this is, and again, please excuse the mention of mankind in this case. Again, this is 1689, so it's a little different in terms of the way that we have this approach of gender in this case. So again, please excuse that. But we're talking about natural rights. We're talking about the individual liberties that people have, and I'm actually gonna jump here because one of the things I like is the idea of talking how this connects with modern libertarianism is this self-ownership and full right to control of one's person. So again, everything that we're talking about within government is so hands-off, saying we can protect ourselves, that we are all rational humans, and we do these things in terms of promoting ourselves and our businesses in a way that is, what's best for our business. And it's in a way very Aristotelian here, where it's you do the best you can, and then another group does the best they can, not because of, or you try to outdo the first person. And it's not because you are trying to one up the other person. It's this cycle of wanting to do better consistently. So you just keep one upping each other in a healthy competition. And thus, there's this cycle that comes along with it. And again, this is where, a libertarian would say, I don't want the government to intervene with this stepping up of one or the other. Or you have another organization that can't reach that. And that's where they kind of get weeded out. And this is where a lot of modern libertarianism kind of gets misconstrued in some cases, where some little organizations do get kind of swallowed up because of the way the free market works. That said, I think one of the misconceptions of it is the whole idea of the best product wins out. So currently there is the notion of how some of these big chain restaurants, your Applebee's type organizations, are not being, for example, millennials and Gen Zers are, quote, putting them out of business. This was I can't remember where this article was, but it was really interesting. And a lot of people were getting on libertarians' case because of the free market to say Applebee's has a whole lot of money, therefore they can keep up with everything. And then you've got examples like Blockbuster, for instance, that is barely holding on by a thread, or Toys R Us that is completely gone in this case. The idea behind it is we say, now I have Amazon, now I have Netflix, and things change in this case. Now, you would say that this is one major company swallowed the other, but the basis of it is the pragmatic use of it from the and again, this is not necessarily a personal philosophy, but where libertarian comes into play, where a libertarian would say, it's not necessarily that Amazon had more money than a Toys R Us, or Netflix had more money than a Blockbuster. What ends up happening is the need that people have changes for ease of use, for instance. It's the same reason that decentralized movie and music pirating sites really started to change the industry of music. The same way CDs usurped cassette tapes, the same way cassette tapes usurped 8-tracks. I mean, there are so many cases. And I'm going to stay with music here for an instance, because this is kind of interesting, where 8-tracks in this case I don't know if I'm running on my timeline completely accurately, usurped the idea of vinyl records. Vinyl records are coming back, and they're becoming a big part of music culture now. Now that's interesting, because we're saying that this was a market that was completely dead, and now it's rising again. And what's interesting about that is it is a product that is in need, and the free market would be able to support that type of demand, if you will. Again, that people are interested in owning vinyls. The fact that CD shops are less becoming CD shops anymore and becoming more vinyl in this case. So the basic principle within this libertarian philosophy is that the best product wins out. And so these restaurants like Applebee's, yeah, they're losing business because their food's not particularly great. Now, I haven't been to an Applebee's in a long time, but the times I've been, I'm like, it's okay. I wouldn't consider it good, personally. And you can disagree with me all you want. And if you want to say something in the comments, you can. But, I prefer some local places in Boone, preferably before. And so if that local place starts to gain money, starts to gain popularity, then that is part of what libertarian means within a free market. It means that even though you are small, the fact that you are using local ingredients, the fact that you have good chefs, the fact that you have good service, so forth, blah, 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 it means that I can start to overrun some of the bigger products. I mean, look at the industry for beer right now. But Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors, they've had trouble in terms of keeping the craft beer market at bay. And so one of the things they've done is said, you know what, we're going to buy the rights to your beer, but basically what it is I'm going to handle your distribution. And this is where a lot of people, especially in craft beer, get really upset about things like this. But again, modern libertarianism would suggest that these craft beer organizations have threatened macro beer so much that they have to act in this case to kind of keep themselves alive. And that is a very survival of the fittest, natural selection type of business in this case. And again, whether you agree with it or not is another story, but it is kind of an interesting look in terms of the philosophy. If you are an advertiser working in an organization, the best thing you want to do is what's best for your company. Okay, other things that we can look at is that we can say within moral theories against government regulation continue. Like I said, you can kind of pause the video within Milton Friedman, the free to choose. Central banks are responsible for inflation and deflation. Market works efficiently to allocate resources to maintain macroeconomic equilibrium, and that's kind of an overall instead of micro in this case. He also argued for a volunteer army, freely floating exchange rates, abolishing licenses of doctors, a negative income tax, education vouchers, no big government. Again, this is a very common theme here. And then comes, the utilitarian. What is the public interest? And again, really try to look at these in terms of what are some of the arguments being made here, whether it be public interest. And again, this is a tough thing to talk about, especially within advertising, that even if individual or minorities get hurt. And what this particularly means in this case is you may be a smaller business. This is the same thing of where an organization might advertise their particular product in an area that can't compete. So, this is the trouble with Walmart that a lot of people have, is the whole notion that Walmart comes in and is able to sell the same things for much less and has a more convenient option, which is why a lot of people get really upset with them, mainly because a lot of these smaller organizations do get hurt because, again, they can't compete in the same case. In which case, the libertarian philosophy would look into, they need to do something else to kind of look into survival in this particular area. And so, again, in many ways, you can see this as an area where people say this is pretty insensitive, but the free market is often associated with things like advertising. And then there are moral theories supporting government regulation, like Stiglitz. Free market can achieve maximum efficiency only under certain ideal circumstances. And this is basically saying that the invisible hand isn't there, and we're talking about these well-informed individuals. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes people use their monopoly for power or abuse in this case, or exploitation. And we're going to talk about some of those exploitations throughout the course of the semester. This is very big in terms of this idea of government regulation. And so we have a couple of things here. The main one is the Federal Trade Commission Act. And so we have the FTC, which talks about trade and advertising in terms of what you can and can't do. There is also the Wheelerly Amendments for consumer protection. And this is, again, really honing against false advertising in this case. So both of them run in that same area. We also have the procedure of FTC law enforcement complaint filed against deceptive practices. So to back up just a little bit, what is considered a deceptive practice? And there's a lot of different things that we can cover over, but let's just stay with the idea of deception. So we look at corrective advertising, for instance. And this is the example I put up here is Doan's Pills. This is a very famous example. Is basically saying that this is a particular pharmaceutical that's being distributed here. And the issue that we have with this particular area is that the claims were, quote, unsubstantiated. So it means that the way that they were saying that something was going on didn't actually hold up in court. So although Doan's, for instance, could be considered an effective pain reliever, there's no evidence that Doan is more effective than any other pain relievers for back pain. And this is this comparative advertising that comes up throughout the course of the semester. We'll be talking about this. What does it mean to compare yourself to others? And can you actually say objectively that yours is better than the other? This is why, for instance, the Pepsi challenge still works in terms of, I don't know if you've seen advertisements. They haven't done one in a while, but every so often Pepsi would do the Pepsi challenge, which would say, try Pepsi versus Coke and see what you think and which one you prefer. Well, the blind taste test would say, I prefer Pepsi over Coke. And you can get away with that in terms of comparative ad because it is objectively better based on the people that are looking at it. So again, this is backed by, now granted, this is based on subjective opinions by the people who are using it. However, this is a case that they can get away with it a little bit more versus a subjective claim to say mine is better because of what reason? Again, this is where Doan's Pills comes into play here. We also get into, again, the nature of comparative ads. We look at the lawsuits of AT&T versus Verizon Wireless, where Verizon Wireless had the commercial of there's a map for that. So in this case, Verizon was giving AT&T a little hard time for their commercials, which was there was an app for that. And yet Verizon put it into such a perspective to say there is a map instead of an app. They were playing on this commercial that AT&T used and basically saying that this was something that was against market share, for instance, for AT&T, which is why they filed lawsuit against Verizon Wireless. There's also the instance of puffery, and puffery is kind of an interesting way of saying things about exaggeration. Like, can this actually happen if done? And in a lot of cases, we would say, puffery would say, no, you cannot produce that. And there are some weird case studies for this. For instance, I think it was Toyota Tacoma. I'm not 100% sure, but this was a commercial where a Toyota was driving down this rocky road, and all of a sudden a meteor comes up and strikes it, and it keeps driving. Now, this was put for lawsuit for the reasons of puffery. However, the argument made was, have you ever seen a meteor strike one of our trucks? And what happened when it struck one of our trucks? Since you can't say that, we can't say it's exaggeration because we don't exactly know what would happen. Now, is that bumping up against the line? Absolutely, but it does make for an interesting case study in terms of how some of the arguments is made. And again, talking about the ethical procedures of, what is an exaggeration and what is it considered to be a dangerous exaggeration versus something along the lines of that we don't know. It's so unknown that we can actually make that claim. Other things we might look at are the FDA. Regulates advertisements of food, medicine, therapeutic devices, and cosmetics. In August 23rd, 2007, we talked about sunscreen products. Basically, and this is great for sunscreen products, is they not only have to put some of the ingredients that are listed here, but the other thing that's really interesting is they treat it like it's a pharmaceutical now, like because it's a lotion. Excuse me. That it's kind of put under this drug market. And what this means, though, is we're putting it almost like the reverse of tobacco, for instance. So tobacco has the Surgeon General warning, but the FDA basically says that this is what sunscreen is used for. It has helped to prevent UVA and UVB rays, which actually really helps in terms of the proposed label. So you can see it down here about what is said about the certain UV rays and how sunscreen can protect and prevent things like skin cancer, for instance. Other things, FDA regulates DTC, pharmaceutical advertising, and the main thing that we're looking at with this particular area, why am I blanking on this? Hello? Apologies. Sorry, we had a car go by that was extremely loud, and I lost my focus a little bit. FDA, in terms of direct to consumer advertising in 1997, promotions and prescriptions of drugs, including the content of DTC advertisements. And within the FDA, this is actually extremely important because pharmaceuticals in this case really have an interesting case. I mean, we've got one of the more recent cases with Dr. Oz and promoting potentially unreliable claims about the nature of what certain pharmaceuticals can do. And again, this goes actually back into puffery to say, this certain pharmaceutical can do X, Y, Z. And for a lot of people, this is really important because, again, we're talking about our health here in this particular case. Other things we can look at are FCC, complaints about advertising, the nature of products advertised, timings of certain ads, loud commercials, indecent commercials. So this has to do with more of the airway side of things rather than the actual message itself. So this can be applied to things like outdoor ads, that kind of thing. The ATF, U.S. Postal Service, National Association of Attorney General, local government. I mean, these are all particular things of advertising being regulated by other government associations. However, there's also self-regulation, and these are some of the organizations that are NGOs in this case that work in terms of self-regulation. And it's really interesting how many organizations take place in this. Probably one of the most famous ones, and I think I've already talked about, was alcohol advertising and Please Drink Responsibly. And in this particular case, they self-regulate this. This is not through the FTC or anything like this. And the same thing for like children, for instance. Children Advertising Review Unit, making sure that people within their own organization are aware of what effects like media literacy could be on children. And then there's online, and this is kind of interesting because some of these Internet Advertising Bureau can make things a little bit different. difficult because, the internet, we're noted across the world for different particular reasons. In this case, and we don't have the same regulations that we would on national television. However, actually sites like YouTube actually do a pretty good job in terms of regulating certain things with advertisers. For instance, you can get not necessarily flagged, but if you use profanity in one of your videos on YouTube, this can actually limit some of the advertisements you get based on the videos that you are producing. So this is a major thing for a lot of people. And what happens is, because of, again, not any government regulation, but because YouTube establishes this rule, this means that certain people have to abide and produce content in a certain way. So this is very important. So anyway, that's it for today. I will not be lecturing on Friday. I will start back up on Monday. Please make sure to get to your assignment.